Good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's safeguarding briefing. Lovely to have you with us, and watching this, please do like, comment and share the briefing. That would be very, very much appreciated. If you are live with us or if you're watching the replay, then the first one definitely applies to you. In order to get the best from this, make sure that you've moved yourself somewhere quiet. If you're watching live and you've got a question, then use the chat function or send me a Q&A. Otherwise, leave a comment below and I look forward to hearing from you with some of your takeaways from this live safeguarding briefing on the 1st of December 2020. Before we begin, who is it that is talking to you? Well, my name is Kate Young and I am the founder and host of the Global Safeguarding Summit, and I'm also the founder of the Safeguarding Association. I have over 20 years legal experience and I'm now a non-practicing solicitor, and I work predominantly with further education and higher education institutes and those that surround them, who work predominantly with 15 to 25-year-olds to help them navigate that thorny and often hard to navigate crossover period from child protection into adult at risk safeguarding. And here you are. This is the Safeguarding Association. So this is where you'll find out more information about us and how you can come and join us inside our members hub. Tonight, we're going to take a look at three areas. We're going to look at what's happening in terms of some news stories and some particular reports that have been released. We're going to look at some legal updates that have been taking place. And finally, we'll round off this briefing with some areas for you to consider as possible areas of impact, influence, or certainly areas to be aware of in the new year. So in case it's escaped anybody's notice, we are still in the midst of a global pandemic. The country is about to go into different tiers as I had talked to you, as I said, on the 1st of December 2020. There is hope that there will be a space for families to get together at Christmas. At the moment, everything is still being discussed, and as yet, the final detail as to what happens with whether schools are going to stay open, how students are getting home in the lockdown window, and what happens over Christmas in terms of those young people and adults who are in care homes, etc., is all still being determined. In other news, I think this time of year is traditionally reporting time of year, and there have been 4 biggies released in the last few weeks. So the first to let you know about is the Good Childhood Report. That's a report from the Children's Society. Some very, very interesting findings in that, which we will look at in a moment. The next report is from the NSPCC and is How Safe Are Our Children 2020. Again, worth a read, and I'll share some of the key findings with you shortly. The Children's Commissioner has now published her report, which is Where Are They? Who Are They? Where Are They? Rather. And that is, again, worth a read, particularly if you're safeguarding lead. And finally, a really interesting study into children's mental health, particularly over the lockdown period, so from March to October 2020. It's a course-based study and is really intriguing in terms of its findings, and actually I think offers a glimmer of hope where perhaps we were significantly concerned for the welfare of our young people, particularly the younger age range. So that if you're working with younger children, that's a report definitely to take a look at, definitely a study to kind of digest and see if their findings accord with what you are finding on the ground as well. So some of those key findings that have come about, well, the age range 16 to 24, so adolescence into young adulthood, has been found to be the second most vulnerable group. The most vulnerable group being babies and under fives. That hasn't changed, but certainly the second most vulnerable group, the group I work with, are the 16 to 24 age range. And you get particularly complex issues arising out of that, where you have teenage pregnancy, young families. Remember, in the UK, and certainly in England, you are allowed to get married at 16 with your parents' consent, or those with parental responsibility giving their consent. So it's a particularly difficult age to navigate from a professional's perspective. The Good Childhood Report has noted that levels of happiness within adolescents have decreased since its previous report. And the report also found that in England, we had the 5th highest proportion of children in Europe who were below the midway point of 5 out of 10 for life satisfaction. They rarely or never felt happy. They were feeling sometimes or always sad. And they've really felt that they didn't have a sense of purpose. It's really, really sad outcome of this particular Good Childhood Report 2020, and shows how difficult it is for our young people. And this has been in a similar situation for the last couple of years. So things haven't really got better. If anything, they seem to have slipped in terms of this particular report. Women's Aid have also been producing further information, and what they have found that of the 1.2 million victims of domestic abuse, women aged 16 to 24 are the most at risk for domestic abuse, which is a really scary figure if you consider that they're also the most at risk, the second most at-risk age range, and they have decreasing levels of happiness within that age range as well. Police are recording higher rates of sexual offences against adolescents compared with younger children, and that comes from the How Safe Are Our Children report from the NSPCC. And finally, the last thing I want to pull out is that earlier this year there was the triennial review of serious case reviews that take you from 2014 to 2017. And we know from the NSPCC How Safe Are Our Children report that this age range, certainly the older age range, is struggling, and that the most prevalent type of harm that they face is that of neglect. And this report, the triennial review, concluded that adolescents living in situations of neglect may be particularly vulnerable to having their needs and the risks they face overlooked. And that was from a range of practitioners and family as well. So not a single issue situation at all. So it's a damning picture in what is already a very difficult year. And for me, it really shows the difficulty that the adolescent age range is struggling with, and how they're already in a very difficult situation, and this is simply making the situation far worse for them. Okay, some legal updates to share with you now. And as we talk, there has been, as of today, a judgment published, which I'll mention in a moment, that actually will have an impact, a potentially really far-reaching impact for those of you working with young people under the age of 16. But the first thing I wanted to remind you of is the domestic abuse bill. I seem to have been talking about this an awful lot in these briefings over the last few months. It still hasn't received royal assent. It is awaiting its second reading in the House of Lords. There's a lot of amendments being debated. There are a lot of things still being discussed with this particular piece of legislation. So it is still awaiting royal assent. We're not there yet. and there isn't a date yet for the second reading in the House of Lords either. I'm hopeful that I will have more information for you in the first briefing of the new year, at least to let you know what the dates are for that. But at the moment, it is still a bill and there are still amendments being sought to it. And this is the case I was talking about. This is a High Court case, short named as Bell versus Tavistock, but it's the Tavistock and Portland NHS Trust. And it's around the puberty blockers in gender dysmorphia cases. And it was brought in part by a young girl who was given puberty blockers at the age of 16, Kira Bell. She transitioned, had a double mastectomy, and is now 23, so really not that old at all, and felt that she really shouldn't have been given those significant drugs at that particular age, and so has brought with others this case against the trust, and the judgment's been handed down today. And I've just highlighted some of the key areas from it. I am talking to Safeguarding Association members about this case tomorrow because of the implications it has. But the High Court has said that it is doubtful that a child aged 14 or 15 could understand and weigh the long-term risks and consequences of the administration of puberty blockers. In respect of young persons aged 16 and over, the legal position is that there is a presumption that they have the ability to consent to medical treatment. Given the long-term consequences of the clinical interventions at issue in this case, and given that the treatment is as yet innovative and experimental, we recognise that clinicians may well regard these as cases where the authorisation of the court should be sought prior to commencing the clinical treatment. This is potentially huge. It's going to depend on where the risk sits for this, and I have yet to read the full judgment. It may be that this actually has bigger implications for those of you working with under 16s in terms of consent to various different things. So if you want access to my brain on this particular issue, the best way to do that is to come inside the Safeguarding Association Members Hub and watch the video that I will be recording for members tomorrow, but also come and have a chat with me about this particular case, because there is a real risk here that if you're working with children in this particular age range who are looking at consenting to medical treatment within this particular age range as well, then I fear this may cause a lot of reluctance of clinical staff to forge ahead if there is any doubt. I suspect, certainly given the wording that is there, that clinicians will certainly be seeking authorization of the court before any clinical treatment is actually started, because certainly in these particular cases, there is such huge implications for these young people. I know that places like the Mermaid Trust are really concerned about this. So there's a lot of backlash in both camps around the implications of this particular judgment. And it'll be interesting to see if there is any appeal or response to it. So we will watch this space, but if this is an area you're working in and you want some added security in relation to it, then the way to do that is to come inside the association and come and join us and get access to that additional information, training and support. The last area to consider then in terms of legal updates is there is now a review of family court practice. I know from my years in practice that there has long been a belief that actually family law proceedings, so where there are arguments about who a child lives with or who a child actually sees, so parents, grandparents, actually can cause further harm to young people, particularly thinking around those cases of domestic abuse, those cases where there's maybe coercive and controlling behaviour from a parent who is now estranged or separated from a partner who's fleeing domestic abuse or coercive and controlling behaviour. And as such, there is a big review that is now taking place into how the courts are applying certain provisions of the Children Act 1989, particularly looking at this issue of not putting children at risk of harm, and to define involvement as involvement of some kind, either direct or indirect, but not any particular division of a child's time, and the impacts on child's welfare of the application of these particular provisions. So it's going to be something that's not going to report for some considerable time. There's a lot of work to be done, but the outcome potentially is really quite enormous and could result in a legislative change. As I said, it depends what the outcome of that review actually is and what the appetite is to amend any particular legislation that is there at the time. So be aware of that. If you're one of those people who has long since argued that actually going through family proceedings after a divorce and forcing children to have contact with a parent who's been domestically abusive to another parent, even though there doesn't appear to be any physical risk to the child, is actually harmful, then this is one to watch for you, as well as other areas as well. Okay, lastly then, let's have a look at what I think is coming in the next few weeks and months. So if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I've been saying there'll be an increase in referrals. It hasn't quite happened the way that we thought it would, although what seems to be happening inside local authorities is that there's a bit of a pressure cooker happening. So referrals are going through to children's social care, but during the pandemic, lots of authorities have tried to keep a lid on the number of cases that were going into the court arena. So you now have this kind of squished impact in some areas where you've got referrals coming through, but nothing's coming out at the top. And what's happening in the middle is that the risks are getting greater. They're getting more and more difficult to manage the further this goes on, and the risks are increasing. So I think we're going to see a big surge in those sorts of cases over the next 12 months. It all really depends on how long this lid can be kept and whether or not it can happen in incremental phases, or whether it will simply just burst out at the seams. But I know that lots of the courts aren't going to be doing face-to-face hearings as standard, certainly till the end of January. The Supreme Court is sitting now remotely until the end of January. I was reading the other day. The visits aren't necessarily from social workers happening in person. So there's a lot of things that are going on. So there is, the more we see young people, the more they can start accessing all of those other services that have dropped off purely because they've not been able to see these young people because of the restrictions. As they start to happen, as the trust rebuilds, you will see an increase in referrals. I say it's just been a slow increase at the moment in terms of what's coming through for local authorities. I am aware that other areas, certain clinical provisions, are absolutely inundated with child protection issues. So it depends where you are. There are some really big things occurring depending on your particular sector. Along with that comes an increase in stress for frontline workers. We know that clinical staff are and those working in hospitals, NHS, are absolutely snowed under. Teachers are really at the brunt of this as well. So there's a lot of things. Increased stress can lead to all sorts of other difficulties for staff. What you don't want is an additional raise in staff absences due to stress, when you've already got a difficulty in terms of staff absences because of self-isolation, because of fear of returning to the workplace if they are particularly vulnerable, and also in terms of those actually becoming infected with COVID as well. So be aware of that. Information sharing, I'm going to flag this every time because it is an area that we're still not great at. And again, working with adolescents, it can be really hard to get the information shared where you need it to be shared. And trying to get either a strategy meeting or some sort of discussion happening with your local authority can be really difficult if you're working with 16 plus. So absolutely keep pushing that information through to local authorities if it's a referral that needs to be made. Court orders, I'm going to mention those now because we are coming up to the really difficult time in family life, which is that of Christmas and the holiday period. This is traditionally the time of year when applications for contact for residents go through the roof, particularly contact applications. Sadly, I was reading from a mediator the other day that where she's normally really busy with dealing with such fallout, so who's having contact when and what that's going to look like, what handover is going to look like. Actually, what she spent a lot of time doing is drawing up financial agreements because families are separating as a result of COVID-19 and the lockdown situation. So you're not only going to have the pressure cooker of stress for frontline workers, you're not going to have the pressure cooker, you're going to have the pressure cooker for families just not knowing who they're going to be spending Christmas with. And if you've got separated families and estranged families already, then there are provisions in place at the moment as to how that should work. My understanding is that if there is a court order in place, there is absolutely nothing within any of the COVID-19 guidance or legislation that says that that should be breached and giving anybody permission to breach it. Really difficult, and I anticipate there's going to be a lot of emotions running high, and I suspect I will probably be dealing with a lot of member issues around what's happening with court orders and how that's managed and the fallout of all of that come the new year. Another fallout is going to be Brexit. It is going to have massive implications on the economy that's already struggling, but also the issues for child protection in terms of a rise in far-right extremism, radicalisation, additional grooming wars, all of those kind of things going on. And also thinking about the rise in unemployment. Furlough has been extended to the end of March, but I know there are a number of organisations that are already letting their staff go, either as redundancy or other. And as a result, you've got a rise in poverty. Not in every single case, but we do know that poverty is one of the big factors when it comes to child protection. In fact, there is a study around the impact of poverty on the issues around child protection. I think it's commented on in both the Good Childhood Report and the NSPCC study as well. So it's something certainly to consider, because we do know that where there is a rise in poverty, there can also be a rise in child protection concerns as well. So that is it for this particular safeguarding briefing. Thank you so much for watching with me. And if you've got any comments, please comment, please like, please share this video, and I will either see you inside the Safeguarding Association or I will see you in the new year. If you do want to work with me, then please get in touch. And here is everything that you can have access to. And if you join by the end of December, so by December the 18th, you will also have access to a mini safeguarding audit for your organisation of your policies and procedures. Take care, and I will see you in the new year.